As long as there's been an internet, there have been internet trolls, a type of folks who thrive on needling others with a toxic brew of nasty, negative, and worse. But there's never been much consensus of when such antics go too far. Well, one notorious troll tripped over that line this week. He's been dubbed the most hated man on the internet. Over the years, Charles C. Johnson has accused Barack Obama of being gay, misidentified the subject of Rolling Stone's flawed UVA rape story, and published the home addresses of two New York Times reporters who he thought, incorrectly, had revealed the address of Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson. Johnson knows he's reviled and seems to revel in it.
The media would basically build me up as this villain, right, on the one hand, but I knew that events would basically prove me correct.
Or not. When Johnson recently tweeted asking for donations from anyone interested in taking out the Black Lives Matter activist DeRay McKesson, Twitter suspended his account for the fourth and apparently final time. Johnson says he was just talking about a research project.
It's a common part of the vernacular. I admit it's a bit kind of odd. It's an odd formulation, but I speak oddly.
And Johnson is pushing back, threatening Twitter with legal action if he's not reinstated immediately.
Because I'm a brand challenger and because I'm kind of a rebel, people like to punish me.
Or maybe because he's a jerk. While his right to free speech is undeniable, his right to pop off on Twitter is not. This is also the same guy who said that that horrible Amtrak derailment was the result of homosexuality. So he's really reached. But, I mean, the point here is, on the First Amendment, he's not guaranteed from a private organization any right to the First Amendment. That's an issue with the government. So he may take issue with Twitter all he wants, but am I right? That's not going to make any difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing now is that people are conflating the public spaces, the squares that we meet online, as being similar to the public spaces in real life. You do have a right to go into Boston Common right now and say whatever you want. You can hold a march for whatever cause or theme is deep within your heart. Online, these spaces are not free. They are made by corporations and who have invested a lot of time, money, and effort in creating them. Twitter has no responsibility to Chuck Johnson, and thankfully they've finally taken some action on this, and hopefully they're going to be cracking down on even more trolls.
Well, that's the issue. Is there a line? I mean, well, Reddit has even taken this on.
Yeah, I mean, I want to turn that around a little bit, Justin, because you're absolutely right. I mean, Twitter is a private corporation, and it's not up to them to enforce the First Amendment. And I think that in Charles Johnson's case, they probably did what they had to do. I mean, he'd really crossed all kinds of lines. But at the same time, there was a time when going down to the Boston Common and holding forth meant something. Now, our public discourse has really moved to these privately owned spaces. And Twitter may have acted correctly toward Charles Johnson, but they can do this to anybody for any reason, and there really isn't any recourse. Where is the public square these days? It's on Twitter, it's on Facebook, and we're trusting an awful lot of our First Amendment rights to these private corporations with their own agendas.
Well, I would argue that that's one of the reasons why it's taken Twitter so long to respond, because they're trying to figure out, if we talk about where a line is, and we've had discussions here, and I'm still not clear, but there is a point where even in the public square on Boston Common, if you threaten somebody and it becomes very close to hate speech, now you got a whole different thing. And you can be actionable at that point. So there's Twitter as a private corporation saying, all right, now this guy's talking about taking out somebody. Yeah, right. We have got to stop it. And by the way, I want to add that before this point with this Daniel guy, Women Action and the Media, Chuck guy, what's his name is? Well, Women Action and the Media, which is a locally based group, and it's an activist group, had worked with Twitter to force them to deal with some of the kind of attacks on women. So this is really, for me, the second big thing that Twitter has had to respond to in a very serious way. And that evolved out of an action here in Boston. Just want to put that on the table.
They haven't solved that problem.
Well, they haven't, but they actually started thinking of put in place some ways, some measurements, and some to determine when somebody has to be dealt with because they have crossed the line.
Yeah, I mean, Callie's absolutely right. The idea that somehow there's a First Amendment protection to say anything you want is just simply not true and never has been true. You have the ability to go to the Boston Common and say something, but it's that line about my right to swing my arm stops at the other guy's nose. There is a point where when your speech libels someone, that's what libel and slander is all about, not to mention what could be seen as extortion or threat. There are laws against that kind of speech, and when you cross that line, you're subject to some kind of an action. Maybe it's civil. Twitter, I think, is facing the point where it could be seen as the vehicle conveying that allows a threat to go forward, and it could be subject, I think, to libel, slander, or other kinds of legal action, which is what I think caused Twitter to cut this guy off.
Well, I mean, the one that is really even more dramatic is Reddit, because that's
Reddit
really is the wild, wild west. But how do they determine? Because they have allowed some unbelievable stuff to continue.
Right.
Just recently, they have started putting some censorship and throwing some kind of debate and argument in some of these, what do they call it, subreddit categories off the. But what is the line? Who's judging?
What all the companies want to do at the end of the day, what they have said traditionally in the past is that they're going to create open spaces where people can do whatever they want. They've used that as their legal reasoning before, that they are not responsible for what people do. So in the case of somebody uploading something that's copyrighted, they can say, well, we didn't do that. We just created a space where somebody could do that. That was a user that did that. Now they realize, though, that they have to take some responsibility for what they have allowed. If you create an open space, if you create a yard for people to go into, you have to bear some responsibility for that. And Dan is absolutely right to his earlier point that this is something we should be concerned about. Media companies in particular who are placing so much time and effort in distributing information on these channels. But that said, that at the end of the day, that doesn't mean that there's any reason for us to believe that they're always going to be free. We have to just be aware of that and be open to finding whatever the next channel is. You can guarantee that that's what Chuck Johnson's doing right now.
And to Tom's point about incitement, the constitutional standard for incitement to violence is very, very difficult. I mean, you've got to go a long way before it's considered incitement to violence. I think Charles Johnson arguably did.
Yeah, I'd say he was there.